He thought no one was watching, but every movement, every tense second, had been caught on camera. The new shelter surveillance system, quietly installed a few weeks prior thanks to a generous donation from a former adopter, captured everything in crisp, unforgiving detail. A shelter worker stepped inside Bruno's kennel, hand raised, and struck the defenseless German shepherd. The sound of the slap reverberated through the room, sharp and hollow. But instead of reacting with fear or aggression, Bruno did something no one could have anticipated. What happened next left the staff speechless, stunned, and would change the course of his life forever. Before we dive into the heart of this incredible story, remember to like, share, and subscribe. For most of the staff at Hillside Rescue Center, caring for the animals wasn't just a job. It was a calling, a promise to help those who had been abandoned, discarded, or forgotten. For many of the dogs, it was the final stop on a long, punishing journey. For Bruno, however, it was the start of something none of them could have imagined. Bruno arrived on a chilly Monday morning, just as the sun struggled to break through the low clouds. Rain had fallen overnight, leaving the gravel parking lot slick and gray, turning the dust into thick mud that clung to boots and paws alike. When the back of the animal control truck opened, Bruno didn't move at first. He just sat there, soaked to the bone, fur matted with grime, eyes hollow and tired. His ribs poked through his skin. His paws were torn and bloodied from concrete. No collar, no chip, just the silent shadow of what he once might have been. Hunger had carved his frame. Fear had etched his posture. Guided gently into the kennel by the staff, Bruno didn't bark, growl, or whine. He didn't protest. He simply watched. And even in that quiet, he communicated everything. He didn't trust anyone. Among the staff, one person carried an aura that made Bruno's gaze sharpen immediately. Thomas Graves. He had been at Hillside for over 15 years, a former stable hand turned full-time kennel operator. Thomas wasn't cruel in the obvious sense, but his presence demanded attention. Volunteers and animals alike instinctively gave him space. He rarely smiled, rarely wasted words, and always moved with deliberate, measured steps. When he entered a room, it was impossible not to straighten up, even without knowing why. From the moment Bruno arrived, something about the tension between him and Thomas felt different. Bruno remained quiet, eyes constantly observing, tail tucked, movements precise and cautious. But when Thomas came near, the dog's stillness changed subtly but unmistakably. His ears flattened, body stiffened, eyes locked with a measured, almost calculating intensity. This wasn't ordinary fear. It was deeper, almost primal, a recognition of something Bruno had encountered before. Most of the shelter staff, busy or too accustomed to routine, didn't notice it at first. Dogs reacted in many ways, barking, hiding, lashing out. Bruno did none of these. He simply watched, unwavering, waiting. Whatever he was waiting for, it was not trust. It was something far more complex. It was on a slow, gray Tuesday morning that the cameras would capture everything. Staff were tucked away in the back, sorting medical logs and prepping medications, the low hum of printers and the soft clink of stacked bowls filling the air. Thomas handled the early feeding alone, boots heavy against the concrete, metal scoop and bucket of dry food in hand. As he passed Bruno's kennel, the dog remained silent. Head low, eyes unwavering, posture cautious but calm, a quiet warning. In every detail. Then it happened. The cameras recorded it all. Thomas opened the kennel gate, muttering under his breath, and struck Bruno across the face with a full, open-handed slap. The sound echoed sharply, shocking in its clarity. Bruno didn't retaliate. He didn't snap, bite, or flee. He flinched, whimpered softly, and lowered his head further. His eyes, glistening with more than pain, carried a hollow weight, a story of suffering repeated, endured, and remembered. Maya Sullivan, a 24-year-old veterinary intern, sat in the monitoring room, organizing adoption paperwork. Her eyes caught the movement on the screen. Hands trembling, she paused, rewound, and pressed record. "Oh my God," she whispered, voice barely audible. That night, she didn't sleep. The clip, sent to the shelter director, was meant to be handled quietly, internally. But Maya couldn't let it go. The depth in Bruno's eyes, the resignation and silent endurance haunted her. By morning, she had uploaded the video anonymously to a popular animal welfare forum. No names, no location. Just Bruno. Just the truth. Within hours, the video went viral. Shared across Twitter, TikTok, and Instagram, picked up by dozens of pet advocacy accounts, and amplified by celebrities known for rescuing animals, the response was instantaneous. Outrage, heartbreak, disbelief. How could anyone hurt a dog who had done nothing wrong? Protesters gathered outside Hillside's gates, holding signs that read, "Bruno deserved better," and "Stop the silence." Donations poured in, but not to the shelter. They went to rescue groups, legal funds for abuse cases, and whistleblower protection organizations. Amid this whirlwind, no one, staff, public, or Maya, could predict what Bruno would do next. Later that afternoon, the shelter was quiet. Staff whispered in corners. Volunteers avoided eye contact. Thomas, unbothered, moved through the halls with the same heavy boots, stoic expression, and clanging food bowls. Everyone expected Bruno to retreat, cower in the corner, tail tucked, eyes down. That's what trauma dictates. That's what fear demands. But Bruno did something no one expected. As Thomas passed by for the afternoon check, Bruno rose, not with excitement, not with fear, but with calm, measured presence. Ears neutral, tail low but loose, eyes tracking Thomas with an expression softer than dread, more searching than suspicion. When Thomas unlocked the gate, Bruno took a step forward, then another, until he gently pressed his head against the man who had struck him. Reverent, intentional. Everything froze. Thomas, mid-motion, hand on the bucket, was stunned. Maya, watching, silently from the viewing window, saw it all, the stillness, the leaning, the wordless gesture conveying more than any bark or bite could. A tightness gripped her chest, her eyes blurred. The tears that welled up weren't just sadness. They were awe, disbelief, and a raw, aching beauty she hadn't expected to witness in a place like this. "Why would he go to him?" she whispered. Beside her, Dr. Keene, a consulting animal behaviorist, murmured softly, "This isn't obedience. This is trauma and hope." Bruno hadn't lashed out. He hadn't hidden. He had defied instinct, remembered suffering, and still chosen to step forward. That single act shattered every assumption about abused animals. Later that evening, a second clip surfaced, a quiet moment captured from the corner of the feed, showing Bruno leaning gently against Thomas's leg. No sound, no violence. Yet, the silence spoke louder than any outcry. Maya hadn't posted it. Someone else had. Within minutes, the world paused. Not in outrage this time, but in stunned stillness. People questioned, marveled, and wondered. What kind of soul can forgive? So completely? We don't deserve them. This isn't just a dog. This is something bigger. The tone of the conversation changed. News anchors started asking new questions. Animal psychologists were brought on to panels. Behaviorists chimed in. Dr. Keene, the behaviorist who'd witnessed it herself, was quoted in on interview. "This isn't simple forgiveness. It's a survival strategy mixed with emotional intelligence. Dogs who've been hurt often withdraw or act out. But sometimes they reach out instead. And when they do, they teach us something we don't fully understand yet." Bruno, a nameless stray just days earlier, had become more than a victim. He had become a symbol, not just of cruelty, but of courage, of grace, and of something even deeper, healing. People were no longer just angry. They were listening. Within 48 hours of the first video going viral, the board of directors at Hillside Rescue Center released a public statement. Thomas Graves was terminated immediately. No fanfare, no excuses. Just one sentence. This action does not reflect our values. But the public wasn't finished. Under mounting pressure, local authorities launched a formal investigation. Protests outside the shelter continued. Signs now joined by candles, flowers, and handwritten notes taped to the fence for Bruno. 2 weeks later, Thomas was charged with misdemeanor animal cruelty. Some demanded jail time, others wanted him banned from working with animals permanently. But when the case reached court, the judge took a different approach, one that raised eyebrows, but strangely felt right. Thomas was sentenced to 12 months of court-mandated therapy, 400 hours of community service, and 6 months of volunteer work at a rural rehabilitation farm for abused animals. It wasn't about punishment anymore. It was about understanding. The judge explained, if cruelty can be learned through years of silence, then perhaps compassion can be relearned through the presence of those we've harmed. Many were skeptical. Some were furious. But there was something quietly profound in the idea that redemption doesn't begin with denial. It begins with accountability. At first, Thomas resisted. He showed up late. He stayed quiet. But as the weeks passed, surrounded by animals who had survived far worse than he had ever imagined, something began to shift. He started listening more, speaking, softer, staying longer than he was required to. And for the first time in years, he looked at an animal and didn't see a task. He saw abing. Thomas began to change from that moment on, not all at once, not perfectly, but honestly. And Bruno, he didn't know about court dates or sentencing, but in his own way, he had already led the way by offering grace when no one expected it. He opened a door the rest of the world never thought to walk through. Maya didn't plan on adopting Bruno. At first, she just wanted to make sure he was okay, that he had a soft place to land after everything. But the moment, Bruno leaned his head against Thomas's leg. Something shifted inside her. Not just sympathy, but something deeper, a bond. She visited him daily, even before the formal investigation began. Sat outside his kennel, read aloud while he lay still, ears perked, but calm. Slowly, he began to trust her, not a lot once, but in layers. A tail wag here, a soft nuzzle there, quiet progress. By the time the shelter approved her adoption application, Bruno was already waiting at the gate when he heard her footsteps. In Maya's small apartment, Bruno transformed. His coat grew shinier. His eyes turned alert. He began to carry himself with quiet confidence, not just surviving, but living. He'd follow Maya from room to room, curl at her feet while she studied, nudge her hand when she'd worked too long without a break. He didn't bark much. He didn't need to. His presence said enough. But Maya knew his story couldn't end with her living room. Bruno had more to offer. So she enrolled him in a therapy animal certification program. It took time and patience, more for humans than for him. But Bruno passed with calm certainty. Soon after, Maya began taking him to local schools and community centers, places where children asked hard questions, places where people were hurting quietly. Bruno would walk into each room with quiet steps and a gentle gaze, wearing a navy blue service vest with a single word stitched across the back. Thor. Not just survivor, not just rescued. He was a teacher now of healing, of hope, of how to stand tall after being brought low. And somehow, just by being there, Bruno reminded people of something simple and powerful, that what's broken can still be whole again. The Hillside Rescue Center didn't go back to normal after Bruno. It changed. The board brought in new leadership. They overhauled staff protocols, added surveillance, implemented mandatory mental health screenings, and introduced trauma-informed training for all employees and volunteers. Abuse in any form would no longer be overlooked, excused, or hidden. But more. Than policy, something else had shifted. The culture. Where silence once filled the kennels, now there was intention. Where people once looked the other way, they now looked closer. Bruno hadn't just exposed a single act of cruelty. He had awakened a system that had grown numb. But more than that, he reminded everyone of a truth we often forget. One that applies not just to shelters, but to all of us. What happened to me doesn't define who I am, how I choose to face it.